standstill. I was 7 years old when Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King were shot, and George Wallace was also paralyzed by a shooting. Everyone was shocked. Everyone stood still in those moments. That's gone away. It's just like another day in which someone gets shot or killed, and we move on to the next thing. Our attention span, thanks to all manner of social media and other distractions, has led us away from really, our core beliefs about what's right and what's wrong in our culture. And we simply gloss over these moments as if they mean nothing, when in fact they mean everything.
As if they mean nothing, when in fact they mean everything. Hi, my name is Suri Crowe, and you're watching the MeidasTouch Network. I wasn't even born when President Kennedy was assassinated or Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., but I remember the trauma that our nation was still reeling with when I was studying them in school. And now here we are, barely a week out from another political assassination and the attempted assassinations of several lawmakers, and the news cycle has just pretty much moved on for the most part. The president refused to even call Minnesota Governor Tim Walz to offer condolences on the loss of his personal friends, State Representative and former House Speaker Melissa Hortman and her husband Mark, as well as the grave woundings of State Senator John Hoffman and his wife Yvette.
Ever been able to speak to any of them?
I don't really call him. He appointed this guy to a position. I think the governor of Minnesota is so whacked out. I'm not calling him. He's a mess. So, I could be nice and call him, but why waste time?
I mean, if that does not spell out what a weak, pathetic, and despicable man Donald Trump is, then I don't know what will convince you. And to the larger point, he is the root and stem of this problem. The alleged assassin, Vance Bolter, is a staunch Trump supporter, according to his best friends and roommates, a registered Republican. Investigators say he had a lengthy hit list of targets that were all Democrats or supporters of liberal causes. Yet the MAGAverse immediately attempted to spin the narrative, but no, the violence is coming largely from the right-wing ecosystem. In fact, just last night, a right-wing influencer, a woman by the name of Mila Joy, posted this on X. She wrote, a former U.S. vice president received Secret Service protection for up to 6 months after leaving office, as authorized by the former Vice President's Protection Act of 2008. Kamala only has Secret Service protection until July 20th, 2025. TikTok, Kamala. I honestly don't even know what to say about how chilling and appalling and terrifying that tweet is. And then somebody by the name of Big Blue Wave USA 2026 reposted this and said, if you've never felt the satisfaction of a right-wing lunatic blocking you, just repost this. Mila Joy is blocking everyone who does so. This is her direct threat against Kamala Harris's life. Since deleted, she's giving permission to the next Trump supporter like Vance Bolter. Absolutely. This is how this violent, sick and depraved and twisted right-wing cult responds. I mean, apparently she deleted it, but she still put it out there. And that's because people were calling the Secret Service to investigate her, as they rightly should have. And, the right either denies this violence, they disavow it, oh, it wasn't me, it wasn't us, or they blame it on mental illness. But in my opinion, that is a cop-out, because Vance Bolter or Mila Joy may possibly be mentally ill, but they also know what they are doing. According to investigators, Vance Bolter had planted his murderous rampage carefully for what appears to be months. That is not somebody who just snapped one day. It was meticulously planned, just like the January 6th violent insurrection attacks that President Trump pardoned. So again, if there's anyone excusing and fomenting a culture of violence, it is the MAGA world. And I think most of you have seen the horrific tweets that Senator Mike Lee from Utah put out right after Melissa Hortman and her husband were murdered, beyond depraved. He eventually removed those tweets under extreme pressure. But as far as I've heard, he never apologized for any of his insidious and hateful words. Here is Sarah Seidner of CNN calling out yet another MAGA lawmaker representative by the name of Randy Fine.
Rhetoric, because there's a lot of talk about rhetoric and how this gins people up. A few years ago, you were called out for calling a school board member a whore in a text. You've called one of your congressional colleagues a terrorist. Are you part of the problem here?
Well, look, I think what people write in private text messages to each other is one thing. If I had said that in a public message, I'd understand. But I do think there are issues. Look, when we have protests on Saturday calling something no kings, when Donald Trump isn't a king, he's been elected overwhelmingly by the American people, and it's compared to the revolution. I mean, that is a call for violence. When people are waving signs that say 86-47, I think we've heard this discussion about taking down the temperature after President Trump was assassinated twice, and I don't think people are getting the message. So this is
Are you
real.
not getting the message too?
And we all have
to be fair,
part.
Is it fair to say that the way that you speak to your colleagues, what you say about them, and the fiery rhetoric that you also use, is also an issue that you're thinking about maybe changing?
It's a fair point, but I think fiery rhetoric is different than a call for violence. Calling evil for what it is, calling danger for what it is acceptable. It's when you cross that line and you say, and that person should be killed. That's never a line that I've crossed, nor do I think it should be done. But we saw that kind of rhetoric just on Saturday at these protests. And I think that is a problem. We've seen it repeatedly with President Trump for years. And I do think it's a problem. And the problem is these people are crazy. This guy in Minnesota, he's going to turn out to be crazy. And when crazy people hear these things, these problems do well up.
See, there they go again with the mental illness shtick again, and just refusing to take any kind of responsibility or accountability for the horrific hate speech that he's putting out there. Firstly, if Republicans even believed in the first place that mental illness was really the cause, they wouldn't currently be stripping healthcare away from 13 million Americans, okay, which is what they are actively trying to do right now. And we know that easy access to guns in this country is the problem. Whether or not someone's mentally ill, which most of the time people with mental illness are not the violent ones. They're just trying to get medical health care is what they need. It's the guns that are the problem. Secondly, the No Kings protests that he's talking about were overwhelmingly peaceful, with estimates that over 11 million of us were in the streets, and there were not any calls for violence that I'm aware of, at least on the protesters' behalf. The only incident that I'm aware of was that a protester was sadly fatally shot by peacekeepers in Salt Lake City, which was just a tragic event there. So he's lying, of course. The stochastic terrorism is coming from the very top. Donald Trump has threatened former staffers of his for merely speaking the truth. Here's Trump Point One staffer Miles Taylor talking about the fear that he and his family are undergoing right now since Trump issued a criminal investigation of him.
Miles Taylor, how are you doing?
Nicole, I appreciate you having me. We're getting through. It's been a bumpy road, but as you know, we've kind of done this show before. Coming out against Donald Trump was a rough and tumble exercise. He made it so, but we always knew if he got reelected, his goal would be revenge, and that's exactly what he's trying to carry out.
What is he trying to do to you and your family?
Look, I think he wants to create a modern blacklist and have that blacklist ruin people's lives. Because it's a lot of effort to go through with trying to pursue and prosecute hundreds of your enemies. Yeah. All you need to do is try to successfully do that to a couple to send a message. And that's what some of his officials have said is the point of these executive orders against me and Chris Krebs are to send a message. And to a certain extent, that works. I mean, in the immediate wake of this, I'm the sole income earner in my household. I had to leave my job. My wife, who stayed at home with our daughter, had to return to work so that we can buy diapers, so we can buy formula, so we can pay the mortgage. We had to go launch a legal defense fund because we don't think we can pay for the legal bills for this type of thing. And then there's the security threats, which I know you're all too familiar with, but you get crazies coming out of the woodwork from the MAGA side who will dox you and your family members and send threatening messages. And you never know which one of those is going to become the real thing. I'll add to that, Nicole. Someone told us relatively recently, you guys need to go update your last will and testament to name a guardian for your daughter. I will tell you, that's not something you take lightly when you're sitting there with your wife and a lawyer signing documents to name a guardian in case the worst happens, because we don't know what's going to happen. That's how serious it is. And that's just being named on the blacklist. Charges haven't happened yet. They haven't raided our house yet. But that's what it looks like in modern day America when the president adds you to that list.
I mean, absolutely terrifying. And here's Representative Jasmine Crockett talking about the security threats that she feels as a member of Congress.
The environment. And so I did text a Republican that I consider to be a friend. Yes, I have Republican friends, just so y'all know. I did. And I said, listen, your people need to fix this. Like, I'm tired, right? And there are Republicans that are concerned. And to be clear, they're not really concerned about the radical leftists that they talk about. They're concerned about MAGA. Because we saw the same thing happen when we had the speaker election, right? And so when people were mad about them not voting for Jim Jordan, they started threatening their spouses and all kinds of stuff. And another thing that they're not talking about that really ticks me off, because I just learned about it in the midst of what happened, is that someone has been sending pizzas to members' homes. And they've not done anything. So I'm just like,
see the admission right there that even the MAGA lawmakers know that it is their own kind that are the threat, that if they're not going along with the party line of what Trump wants and what MAGA Mike Johnson is cracking the whip, that it's their people who are calling in the death threats and saying that it's their families that are at risk. Meanwhile, in LA, the Trump regime is burning up millions of your tax dollars on needless Marine and National Guard troops on the ground so that Trump can punish a blue state run by an effective Democratic governor.
This is a federal building in Westwood in Los Angeles. Those are the Marines. J.D. Vance, the vice president, just wrapped up a visit to this facility. He's here during this ongoing immigration enforcement operation in Los Angeles. He says to get a look at what's going on in L.A., get a briefing from the law enforcement officials, but he's really not spending any time at all on the streets of Los Angeles looking around. He's here for about 5 hours. From here, he's heading to a fundraiser for the Republican National Committee. During that press conference, he said that California Governor Gavin Newsom and Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass are inciting what he called violent mobs against federal law enforcement agents here in Los Angeles.
You had law enforcement officers who were being captured and beaten by violent mobs egged on by Gavin Newsom and other officials.
He also justified the ongoing presence of the Marines and the National Guard on the streets of LA.
It was necessary to send the National Guard to stop that process, to bring some order back to this great city, and to make it possible for the people's president to enforce the people's immigration law.
Before he left, he also called California Senator Alex Padilla, who was put into handcuffs and put on the floor of this building last week when he showed up at a press conference given by DHS Secretary Kristi Noem, by the wrong name. He called him Jose Padilla.
Well, I was hoping Jose Padilla would be here to ask a question, but unfortunately, I guess he decided not to show up because there wasn't the theater. And that's all it is. You know, I think everybody realizes that's what this is. It's pure political theater.
We had wanted to go inside the press conference to ask Vice President Vance if he felt safe in Los Angeles, amongst many other questions, but we weren't allowed to go inside. The vice president's left the building. He's on his way to his fundraiser, and he'll be back in Washington, D.C. tonight.
There were no violent mobs. There were a handful of agitators there, but there were never any protesters on behalf of these immigrants that were being taken in who were actually violent. And Trump and the Republicans know that. The troops themselves do not want to be there. The morale is incredibly low. Not that J.D. Vance would even know that, because he didn't bother to ask any of the troops that before he was back on a jet headed to D.C., but not before he threw out a racial slur at the senior senator, Alex Padilla of California. The Trump regime is intentionally trying to start violence. That has always been Trump's endgame. It's who he is. He is a violent person, chumming the waters. And I just want to reiterate, the political violence in America is largely coming from the right wing. There was no better example of that than the J6 insurrectionists and the president who pardoned all of them. he pardoned all of these violent criminals and cut them loose back into society, where many of them have already reoffended. And, this is not just my opinion. The FBI, at least when it was run by credible people, not Cash podcaster Patel, bears that out, that the criminals are not the hardworking immigrants in this country by and large. And, the handful of criminal immigrants, I absolutely agree, should face the full bearing and weight of the law and due process. And if they are found guilty, they should absolutely be deported. 100%. But Trump's Gestapo is arresting the people who make America work, the hardworking immigrants who want to be here, who are contributing, who are putting money into the economy, who make this country go round. They are not the criminals. And as I said, January 6th, it doesn't get any more white, more native, and more terrorist and violent than that. Keep in mind that 5 officers died as the result of the violence that those domestic terrorists inflicted on our nation that day. Research consistently shows immigrants, including undocumented ones, are less likely to engage in criminal activity, including terrorism, than U.S.-born citizens. A 2020 study found little evidence linking unauthorized immigration to terrorism, and no American has been killed in a terrorist attack on U.S. soil by an immigrant who entered illegally via land or water borders, according to the Cato Institute. While high-profile cases involving immigrants can skew perceptions, and we all know that Fox and the right wing will never stop talking about that tragic Lake and Riley case, the data points to white men, particularly those associated with far-right ideologies, as the primary perpetrators of domestic terrorism. And there you have it, folks. It is not a both sides thing. And in the rare cases when violence does come from the left, we own it. But the proliferation of guns, more guns than people in America, and the constant ginning up of stochastic terror from the White House, it has got to stop. Pardoning domestic terrorists, seriously, from the president, what will stop the next one from doing something else? You cannot put bullseye targets on politicians because you don't like them, Mr. Trump. We've got to speak to each other as humans. And I'll own that too. I get on X sometimes and I just turn into a savage. It is such a nasty cesspool. And the algorithms push us to be that way. Here, take a look at this photo of Melissa Hortman and her dog, Gilbert. This was a human, a lovely woman, and her lovely dog and her lovely husband, brutally murdered in cold blood. Our nation is ill. We need help and we need healing. And it starts with us. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below. Thanks for watching. I'll see you back here soon.
Love this video? Continue the conversation by following us on Instagram @MeidasTouch and help us blow past 1 million followers.